The sexual orientation regulations cover basically anybody who's discriminated against on the grounds of sexuality. So that will cover heterosexuals, lesbian, gay, bisexuals. Any worker in England, Scotland, Wales will be covered by the legislation. So you're covered against harassment, for example. You'll be covered if you refuse to obey an instruction to discriminate against somebody, and also you're going to be covered if your employer regards you as having a particular sexuality which you don't actually have, so perhaps your employer thinks you're gay when you're not. It'll also cover you if you're associated with a person who has a particular sexuality. So if, for example, if you have trouble at work because your daughter is a lesbian, people quite often make a confusion between sexuality issues, sexual orientation issues, and issues relating to transgender matters. Transgender people are protected by certain amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act and also by the Gender Recognition Act of 2004. Workers, that's anybody who's working under a contract personally to execute some work or labour. They will be protected. It's going to cover people like agency workers, police, it'll cover barristers, it'll cover members of the armed forces, and in addition it's going to cover employment trainees and vocational trainees as well. Discrimination means either direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, victimisation or harassment, and direct discrimination occurs where the employer treats the employee less favourably than he actually treats another member of staff, for example, whose circumstances are the same apart from the issue of sexual orientation. Examples of direct discrimination would include discrimination in recruitment, so failing to appoint somebody to a job, things like dismissing somebody from a job on the grounds of their sexuality, not giving training or promotion on those grounds, giving worse terms and conditions and that sort of thing. And then after employment is finished, giving poor references. Lesbian, gay and bisexual workers will be entitled to the same benefits such as pensions, insurance, private healthcare, bereavement leave, adoption leave and the like, or even including things like invitation to social events. The other important thing to remember about direct discrimination is it can't ever be justified. There's no provision for justifying direct discrimination unless the employer can prove that there is what they call a genuine occupational requirement. A genuine occupational requirement means that having a particular sexual orientation is a genuine and determining occupational requirement. In other words, you can't do the job without it, and you work out whether it is that kind of genuine and occupational requirement, determining occupational requirement, by having regard to the nature of the employment or the context in which it's carried out. And so, for example, arguably, and I stress the word arguably, the chief executive of a gay rights organisation, you could argue that that person, in order to have credibility, must be themselves gay. Even if you can establish that it's a genuine and determining occupational requirement, you've got to be able to show that the application of the requirement itself is proportionate, so appropriate and necessary on the facts of the particular case. In relation to employment which is for the purpose of an organised religion, there are special rules. There's a special type of genuine occupational requirement, basically, and the employer can impose a requirement related to sexual orientation for the purposes either of doctrinal compliance or to avoid, in the circumstances of the particular job conflict with the strongly held views of a significant number of the followers of the particular religion. Indirect discrimination occurs where an employer imposes a provision or a criteria or a practice, but it puts the persons of a certain sexual orientations at a particular disadvantage when compared to others who aren't of that sexual orientation. An example of indirect discrimination might be a school that advertises for a couple with children to teach and care for the children in the, say, a residential school. Now, that on the face of it is a neutral condition or requirement, but it's going to place at a disadvantage those sexuality groups who more rarely have children. One of the big differences between direct discrimination and indirect discrimination is that indirect discrimination can be justified. Now, it's up to the employer to justify the imposition of the provision, criterion or practice. And the way they go about that is that they have to be able to show that there's a legitimate aim that they were pursuing. They have to be able to demonstrate that the treatment given to the excluded group or the excluded person was a proportionate means of pursuing that aim.